You go from talking with your colleagues about fucking idiot, what are they doing? Why would they do that? To realizing that it's your turn to be the fucking idiot that everyone else is going to be talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, Budgie Gamal from the Gadigal Lands here in Sydney. It's Startup 360 and I'm Simon Thompson.
And I'm Majella Campbell.
Welcome. Great to have your company this week. Of course, this is a show that is more founder fun than founder made, where we lift the bonnet on startup life and talk to people about what makes them tick. Of course, it's all about staying human. So if you're watching, you can do it on YouTube, you can do it on Spotify, and you can do it, I want to say Netflix. We really need a Netflix series, but no, it is on Apple. We have a cracking guest this week. I'm very excited because he's one of the OGs of Stone and Chalk. Who's our guest?
OGs of Stone. Sorry.
Oh, Jesus.
I was going to say one of the OGs of like the full startup ecosystem.
Yes.
And that is, of course, Chris Kirk, CEO of Stone and Chalk.
Yes. Who has announced that he's stepping down after 3 years of leading the business. Did a big turnaround because it was losing millions when he stepped into the role. And I know it's on a pretty good financial keel nowadays. And he's decided it's time. So we'll talk to him about transition and what's going on. Speaking of transitions, though, I do want to say that this show is supported by Deal, where you can hire, manage, and pay anyone, anywhere. So thank you to Deal. And let's talk about the Deal Spiel, which is our news of the week. One of them, of course, this week was the Workplace Gender Equality Agency's Gender Pay Gap Report. Some numbers that don't look attractive in there. One of the ones notable was Canva. And, you know, everyone can slice and dice everything differently. But Canva saw its gender pay gap more than double from 12.7% in 2023-24 to 27.1% in 2024-25, while the gender pay gap for its average base salary remains steady at 11.7%. Now, this report, everyone has to sort of dial in and give the WGEA their numbers, but they're not comparing apples with apples. You know, you can have a whole bunch of people and perhaps, you know, women in certain roles that can drag down those averages, and you only need one bloke CEO. I'm sure Xero's numbers are quite good, given the CEO's pay packet for a woman there. But for many others, you end up with this disparity, and it's quite raw numbers when you have a look at it. You can go and check it out yourself. Some of the other notable ones there were NextDC, the data center operator, and AWS also had increasing gaps. The statistics showed 28% of NextDC workforce consisted of women, but only 23% earned in the company's top quartile, while the average pay was $581,000 per annum. I would like to be a woman in that quartile, I have to say. But around 33% of the workforce is in the firm's lower, middle, and lowest quartiles as women, where the remuneration averaged between $111,000 and $86,000. That's more like journalism pay. The gender pay gap in NextDC's average base salary shrunk from 20.4% to 18.3%. So there are signs that equality where it's meant to be does look a little bit better, but it's still clear that we've got a way to go. And I suppose the other part is, if you are a woman and it's International Women's Day on Sunday, then you want the opportunity to have the same pay as men.
Absolutely. I think it always goes back to that same point about to me, we're in such a technologically relevant time in our world. It's so important that we create the conditions, the environments that's supporting and incentivizing, you know, more women, more underrepresented groups all across tech, because we're not just building, you know, we're actually building our future. And this is like the future that's going to change like the trajectory of our world at this point. We're really just building our future, and to build economically resilient futures and better world, stopping wars, curing illnesses, you need that diversity. And if we're having decision makers about people who are building technology, we need to have the right thing. So I think it's a good call.
I've got a hot tip on how to stop a war.
Let's hear it.
Don't start it.
I love it.
So you might want to mention that to the US
Might
president.
just text him now.
Oh,
our favorite guy.
don't bomb somewhere. You don't have to stop the war.
Don't
Mr.
actually,
Peace President, or as someone's wrote, Board of Peace, BORED. Just back to the gender pay gap. Overall, in Australia, it shrunk by nearly 1% to 11.2% in 2024-25 financial year. The agency's data spans 10,500 companies and 5.9 million Australian workers. If you want to have a poke around and see if you can make sense of it, do go and have a look at it because it's interesting. Of course, some people who won't be part of the data are probably going to be Block employees alongside the WiseTech employees and the Commonwealth Bank employees. And that was the big news. Just as the show was coming out last week, Block announced, and they're, of course, the parent company of Afterpay, that they're getting rid of 40% of their workforce, 4,000 workers, astonishing numbers, with, of course, Jack Dorsey, the bloke who used to own Twitter, as CEO, blaming AI. There has been some debate around AI washing, they're calling it, where companies that need to make these sorts of transformations are doing it and using the cover of AI. And I made the joke last week with WiseTech that, you know, they'll get rid of 2,000 coders and get 1,000 back to check the AI work. But Dexter Cousins from Tier 1 People wrote a piece for me this week saying, you know, look, I was talking about this moment coming 5 years ago, and here it is all at once, and it will be profound and it will transform the workplace. And I think one of the things that everyone's looking at the moment is the pace of transformation, because generally when we have job losses as technologies roll out, the pace of that transformation is a lot slower. This one is accelerating. When you've got a company that says it's shedding 40% of its workforce, we're used to tech companies doing their annual 10% churn of people. And even though at the time it grabs headlines, you subsequently see that 12 months down the track, they've got more employees rather than less at the end of the year. This seems like a much more dramatic and much more profound transformation that is now underway. It
is. It's completely changing. I'm interested to hear our guests' take on, you know, what that's going to do for our future and all the world, because it's this is something we talk about, I guess, all the time in startups, and particularly in, you know, people who support startups. It's understanding, you know, how are we, all those people who are no longer in jobs, you know, how are we supporting them to get more into entrepreneurship or to create more jobs from new companies and all the rest as well. So I'm interested to see how this will actually roll out, and how we as an ecosystem itself can actually support that too. I think it's changing times.
The other thing, one that's not losing jobs, I have to give a shout out to Canva. I contacted them because there was a report in The Australian that Leonardo AI, which they acquired a couple of years ago, is now being integrated. It's being brought in-house. There's going to be a little standalone unit there. And the report was that a whole lot of jobs were going. Canva denied that, said that the Oz didn't check with them, and people are being offered alternate roles within the business. Given the number of people that are now working for Canva, I'm pretty sure there will be some roles. That was an interesting one. Probably the other ones I want to give a shout out to this week, Leica, the pet food company, best known for that ad. Have you seen the ad?
Of eating the dog food?
No. Oh, that's right. They did that one. I forgot about that.
They do
rather than drink your own champagne, eat your own dog food. No, this is the poo one. Have you seen? This is where the woman goes out and she's taking her dog for a walk, and the dog does its business and she's trying to clean it up, and the cute jogger goes past, and then she realizes she's got poo in her hand. And it was the one that people thought, some people complained, and Netflix banned the ad. It's a little 90-second sort of mock horror film about, you know, sloppy dog poo, which, you know, as a pet owner, I'm sure you've had those moments.
Yes, I don't like to relive them, Simon.
We won't go into too much detail on this one, but well done to them. The other one, of course, Lee Jasper's Firmable AI company raised $14 million, and green fertilizer startup Plasma Leap got nearly $30 million in a Series A this week. They're doing some cool things around producing ammonia with zero carbon, which of course is a key part of fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer. So that's pretty good stuff. But
Shall we get
we've got a lot to
talking?
talk about with
Yeah.
Chris. So should we get straight into that?
I think so.
All right. Well, don't go away. We'll be right back with more on Startup 360.
Welcome back to Startup 360. We are joined with Chris Kirk, CEO of Stone and Chalk. Welcome, Chris.
Great to be here.
Well-
CEO at the moment. If
CEO.
you're watching this in a month, I suppose, you'll be on a beach drinking margaritas somewhere.
Yeah, the CEO of an Italian vacation. I can't wait.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So good. That's the best job, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
Tell us, we like to start off a little bit with an elevator pitch. So tell us a little bit about yourself and even Stone and Chalk.
Yeah, sure. I'm a 10-year veteran now of the startup scene. I've very much grown up around the Australian startup ecosystem. Was one of the founding team of Stone and Chalk back in 2015. And today I have the privilege of running the organisation. I'm a father of two. I'm a Sydney's worst developer. I've tried to learn how to code about 57 times, but I'm loving all the AI tools now. And
When he said that, I thought for a second he was sort of redoing his house. When you say Sydney developer.
yeah, that I mean, as my wife would say, I'm a enthusiastic Bunnings. You'll see me at
Darling, how's
Bunnings
the back deck going?
most Saturdays, but my completion rate on projects is near zero. So interpret that how you will.
You need to put it all into Asana.
Yeah, exactly. As Majella knows, processes aren't my forte, but yeah, massive advocate and participant in the Australian startup ecosystem.
Do you need to learn the developing anymore, or have you moved into the vibe coding?
I mean, I think like most people in the Australian tech scene right now, it's just incredible like how quickly these tools are taking off. And for me, being someone that certainly 10 years ago, part of the motivation to get into Stone and Chalk was just this ridiculously high barrier that I perceived around, one day if I can sit in front of a computer screen, then I'll be able to kind of like access this tech opportunity. Now that's just gone. And I think, it's something that gets me really excited, and probably like most people, there's, 57 side projects on the go, which is good fun.
So one of the reasons why we want to talk to you, this isn't an exit interview, but, a few weeks back.
Feel free to make it one. That could be fun.
You said,
Yeah.
Well, we won't turn into one where you never get to work in this town again.
Sounds
but,
good.
Tell us about that moment, because here you are. You're kind of king of the jungle. You've worked for the company. You're one of the OGs of Stone and Chalk. I would actually have to say you're also a turnaround specialist. The company went through a tough time a couple of years ago, and you took the helm at its darkest moment, and you've turned it into a very successful business. It's got a great relationship with governments all around Australia, and it's humming. Is that where, my job's finished here, off I ride into the sunset? Or tell us a little bit about the thinking about now's the time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's obviously not a decision I came to lightly. Like you said, I took over as CEO maybe 3 years ago now. The organisation at the time, incredible organisation, like a company that I'd really taken from nothing to one that was ultimately supporting, close to 2,000 entrepreneurs every day. But we weren't financially sustainable. We just reported a loss of, I think, close to $6.9 million for the financial year. And ultimately, as a non-for-profit, it was really important that we got back to a place where we could sustainably deliver on the mission.
Not for losses is just as important.
Yeah, you still need to make a profit, as I remind everyone. So that was a really, really tough time. First time CEO, stepping into an organisation obviously that I knew really well, but a role where I had to make some really tough decisions quite quickly. And ultimately, I think you could say that for the last, say, 2.5 years, I've been the turnaround CEO, so to speak. And we're really proud of where we've got to. We just reported a $2.4 million profit for the last financial year. We've got fantastically vibrant hubs, right around Australia, as Majella knows really well. I think Tech Central's really taken off as a great place for entrepreneurs. But yeah, I think a big part of what I've had the privilege of doing over the last 10 years is seeing so many different chapters of companies. I've seen, founders stick around for a bit too long. I've seen, the chapters where companies can really kind of be reinvigorated and renewed when new leadership comes in. And for me, now is the perfect time personally. I mean, for anyone that's worked in a startup I'm coming on 11 years at Stone and Chalk. That's like 50. I had hair before we started, right? It's like, that's a really, really long time. There's so many chapters and mini chapters and kind of like segments and stories, so much that I'm incredibly proud of. But I'm also excited by the opportunity to kind of step back, and it's been a massive kind of personal reflection point because for anyone building a business, so much of your identity and your DNA becomes the company's DNA, the good and the bad. And I think, part of that reflection is you build a company that's almost like 1 or 2 degrees kind of standard deviation from yourself. So you get all the good bits, but you also get all the bad bits. And I'm really excited, obviously like quite nervous, but really excited about one personally, for me, what's next, but 2, I think the opportunity for some new leadership to come in and say, okay, great, you've got an incredible platform in Stone and Chalk. Like, what's the next 10 years look like?
Last year was the 10th anniversary. There was a great party at Collider looking back on the alumni from Stone and Chalk. Was that part of what set this in process? As you started talking to the founders who've had their ups and downs, gone in and out of companies, some return triumphantly, some never to return. You just mentioned that thing of you've seen founders stay on for too long. We've seen it in corporate Australia. Is there a sense in your own head that there's an amount that you can contribute that can take an organisation so far, and then change is just a necessity regardless of how brilliant you may think you are?
Yeah, I think, our 10-year anniversary was, I don't know why it was surprising to me, but it was, you probably just get caught in the day-to-day and you lose perspective of like the chapters of time. And certainly like 10 years is just such a, it's almost like a hard concept to wrap your head around because it's so much has happened in that period. But we had such an intense, overwhelming and just bloody awesome moment as a community where all of these companies were coming out of the woodwork, who some of which you'd forgotten about, some of which have changed names 15 times, some of which, had big exits and now the founders are bored and, want to sell their boat and kind of get back on the tools, and just every version of stuff that could have happened has happened, I say at Stone and Chalk. And so we had this beautiful kind of moment of all of these companies coming together. And for me, it was like, obviously it was an intense moment of pride, but it's also a reflection point to go, okay, cool. Like, what do you take from the last 10 years and like, where do you want this company to be in the next 10? And for me, I think, I also am really, I think, comfortable in having the humility to say, okay, great, like, where's my superpower? And my superpower is, start and build. And we're in a really different space now. Like, I've grown up around the startup ecosystem. I think the Australian startup ecosystem is so different to what it was 10 years ago. Stone and Chalk's certainly so different. And it's in many sense becoming a more mature segment, like this segment around how do you more meaningfully support entrepreneurs. It's not perfectly understood. There's still work to do. But the fundamental concept of like, should Australia back up and coming entrepreneurs? Should we make it easier for Australian founders to succeed? And like, how do we do that at scale? That's kind of understood. You can debate like, what's the best way to do that? How do you do that sustainably? All of the rest of it. But it's very different from what it was 10 years ago when you were really like, hey, here's this like new concept, just trust us. It was like a very different
what's an entrepreneur
ball game. Exactly. Yeah. So I think, that was absolutely a moment, I think of reflection, but also just of immense pride. And I think so much of what came or has, started to come off the back of us having these moments is like even like the reinvigoration of Stone and Chalk's alumni community. And to be honest, I'd kind of forgotten because you lose track of, you have all these thousands of founders going through your programs every year. You lose track of it over time of like who's done what and where people are at. But you have this like these moments where you're reminded, hey, like the strength and depth of Australian entrepreneurs and, the brain's trust of people that have probably gone through every version with every possible outcome of thing that you're going through, like that actually exists. And I still think we need to do a much better job of really like surfacing up, like how do you help the next generation of founders to like tap into that expertise and that kind of like lived experience. But it's very different to when Stone and Chalk started, when you kind of look around the room and you're like, where are these entrepreneurs? Who are these people? And, I think when we opened, we had, I think there was maybe like 140, 150 fintech companies in Australia. And I think Stone Chalk was supporting like 95.
Mhm.
So it was really different.
You're upstairs from me at 50 Bridge Street.
That's
the old
right.
AMP
Yeah.
building when it kicked
Yeah,
off.
you would kind of like sneak up to
Yeah.
write a story and, steal a bottle
Steal
of
a
red
pack of
wine.
chips.
Yeah.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah. And nothing's changed.
You
really,
noticed the red wine too?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Over your time, you've worked with thousands and thousands of founders. I'm interested on your take on, what really makes a good founder.
What makes a good founder? It's funny because you reflect back, and I'm sure many investors and VCs do this too, where you reflect on like, who are the ones that come in and you think, yeah, this person, absolute winner. And sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And then others where you're like, well, this is going to be a long road. And, I think there's plenty of surprise success stories that when I reflect back on the journey too. But I mean, what makes a good founder? I mean, stubbornness, resilience. I think like perspective and understanding that like it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you can see that. You can see the founders who are just like really willing to stay emotionally consistent, but also grind. And so much of entrepreneurship, as both of you know, is hard work. And so, I think absolutely that. I think ability to communicate clearly is becoming more and more important. Ability to like inspire, get people excited. And then, so often I think when I think about the founders that have been really successful over the last 10 years that we've played some part in their success versus the ones that like haven't quite made it. So often the founder has just had a nuance or an insight around something that will be incredibly important, but that more than anything, they've got a knack for timing the market. And, time and time again, those that were able to identify AI agents as the thing to be focusing on 2 years ago, for example, just finding things effortless right now versus, say, the wave of companies starting right now where 9 out of 10 pitches we get every week now is, a company doing broadly the same thing, And so I think, a huge part of it is really like the soft skills. And it's what gets me really excited about, I think, the next couple of years and the massive influx of people we're seeing move into entrepreneurship, because increasingly the like technical skills are becoming important but more commoditized. And it's the soft skills that I think are really going to differentiate the best founders.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier that this was your first CEO role, and on the Venn diagram of founders and CEOs, what you just identified is very similar. But what was the thing that struck you when you took on the role in terms of how you had to be and how you had to lead?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've always been more comfortable maybe than most at making decisions without complete information, which definitely helped me. But I think the biggest shift is this immediate feeling that you feel, in the first hour on day one when you're sitting in a room by yourself just going, okay, what now? And it's this shift from being like responsible versus accountable. And it's so hard to describe, but any founder or CEO just knows the feeling, the shift. It's like, okay, like payroll's on you, And I think it's really easy to talk about, but until you've gone through that process and you are suddenly responsible for not just paying the bills, but the kind of like complete picture of the business, it's really hard, I think, to have empathy for that. And I was really lucky that I like quickly identified that I would need an emotional support group and grabbed 5 or 6 other first-time CEOs, and we became very tight over the period. But it was something that I think I probably expected, but until it happens and you have this kind of like, oh shit moment, you just kind of don't know what you're in for.
I remember it and described it as the moment from cashing the check to writing the check.
Yeah.
And it is a big thing. And the other part is, of course, you go from talking with your colleagues about fucking idiot, what are they doing? Why would they do that? To realizing that it's your turn to be the fucking idiot that everyone else is going to be talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, getting comfortable with that, like getting comfortable that most of the time not everyone's going to be happy with you. Getting comfortable with just wearing it, taking captain's calls, taking the blame, more often than not. I think probably dialing down some of the pleasing instinct and kind of really like picking the lane around like how quickly you can move things and at what level do you want to keep people on side versus make people a bit uncomfortable. Like there are a lot of I think these things that you learn very quickly, I guess, on that road, particularly when you're in a turnaround mode like we were, where it was like, okay, great, let's make large changes really quickly. Let's like refocus completely around entrepreneurs. Let's stop doing 60% of what we're doing. Let's fundamentally change the profile of who's in the team. When you're making kind of like big calls like that quickly and you're under financial pressure, I think it really it's a bit of like a pressure cooker for leadership, really.
Absolutely. I want to know, what's the craziest founder story you've had? I mean, you've got lots of founders working side by side in spaces. There's got to be some good stories there.
Craziest founder story.
We can get this legal before.
Wow, this is like, how many NDAs do you want to sign? No, I mean, one of the as you know, Majella, one of the most awesome things of being running organizations like ours is like you end up. It's not a marriage, but it's really bloody close to it. You end up in this like such privileged position with so many founders where like we know who will probably be having relationship breakdowns or founder breakdowns before their partners probably do. You're just in like such a trust environment. And I have way too many stories, all of which I'm definitely not sharing on camera. But I think, for me.
Save it for the book.
For me, the crazy stories are more the ones where I've probably massively underestimated the potential of a founder and then sometimes almost lost track of what that founder's doing and then had this moment of like immense pride where I'm like, wow, where did this one come from? And I think one really recently was Nick, the founder of Splos down in South Australia. I don't know how familiar both of you are with his story. He started off for his mum's friend working like summer holiday work in a chiropractor, helping them take bookings on the internet. Do you know what I mean? Because they didn't have a website. That level of founder. And, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying, like, really first time business, very green, needed a lot of support, had a vision to make that process better, but I think never anticipated the business he would build. And a couple of weeks ago, they raised, I think it was $45 million, some really top tier investors, including a bunch of Australian NBA players. And they're absolutely dominating now software for like the allied health, like your physios and chiros, et cetera, industry. And for me, that's just such a sign of what's possible when you have particularly young people who are just willing to like put their head down, grind, learn, be receptive to feedback. And it's not quite the like spicy, juicy what's gone down in the co-working space story, because you'll get none of them, but just come to Friday drinks and you can probably get them out of me. But yeah, I think for me, those are the sorts of stories where, sometimes you look at founders and you have ones that you're saying, hey, like, mate, you've been here for 2 days. You should probably go home and have a bit of a rest. You know what I mean? And that doesn't always end well. But, I think there's also a story for just intense focus and maniacal focus, and stories like, Nick and so many others are a great testament to, I think, what you can do in a short amount of time if you just really lock in.
I want to ask you about that aspect of leadership, sort of being the regimental sergeant major / den mother of an organisation like Stone and Chalk.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? Because you've got the read on people.
Yeah.
You can sort of see where the vulnerabilities and the cracks are starting to emerge. How do you tackle that in an open and honest way so that they don't arc up and they're able to sort of say, yeah, you're probably right and I probably should?
Yeah. I mean, it's never perfect and it's really difficult, but we like internally with Stone and Chalk, because we talk about like these moments that matter, and it could be anything. It could be like helping a first-time founder that's just arrived in Sydney get a house. like find somewhere to live. There's just so many of these on the journey, right? But ultimately, it's like creating an environment where people are willing to be vulnerable, and that's tough. Like that's moving beyond the veneer of like, yay, I raised 45 million to like, what's the honest story about the 57 things you got to deal with today to keep your business alive? And so creating that space, I think, is a real art and takes work, but it's also contagious. So like the more people that are being vulnerable and real and celebrating not just like the good stuff, but also the tough stuff, like that becomes a bit of a environment. And I think not perfect, but certainly like what we see in our tech hubs and even at the Tech Central Innovation Hub is like we're doing a much better job than we've ever done at creating these spaces where people can be real and vulnerable and like share their problems and just tackle things, like remember that they're not alone, basically. And that's really important and really powerful. And then the second is, this beautiful, chaotic process that happens every single day. And, Majella would see this through a fish burner's lens as well, where when you sit down with founders and you really unpick, okay, well, it's usually what's the one thing, what's the one thing that's really, it's like, hey, this customer that I've, put all my eggs into a basket and it's been 18 months and they're probably not going to sign, or, I've committed to this investor that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z and actually it's not going that well, or, hey, like this co-founder that I thought it would be perfect and, we're having some challenges. Like there are so many different versions of that story. But over time, you start to see patterns and you realize that, what for most people, when you experience this, you go, geez, I'm the first person to ever have experienced this crazy thing and how am I possibly going to get through it? There's probably like 100 other people that have been through this and most have kind of come out okay on the other side. And so, we are constantly now playing this role, which is so powerful of, hey, go talk to Luke, go talk to Sarah, go talk to Jimmy. And over time, you not only have people that benefit immensely from that, but also once you've received support in a moment that really matters, you're so likely and ready to pay it forward. And I think, we're seeing that right across the Australian startup ecosystem right now. Obviously, there's been a great number of, exits, or at least on paper, like good valuations. We're starting to see more and more founders like come back for round 2, round 3. There's so much kind of like battle scars and shared wisdom. And, we just put out to the Stone and Chalk alumni community who's willing to pay it forward. And we've got a bunch of ways to do that. And it's like the exception. It's like maybe the guy that's on a holiday with me in Italy, doesn't respond to his email, but everyone else is just ready to roll up the sleeves because there's no one that's built a company by themselves. And I think there's a real maturity and almost a bit of like a solidarity around that now. And maybe the badge of pride around putting your head in the sand and saying, hey, like I'm just going to kind of like bang my head against the wall until I solve all these problems is no longer so kind of idolized. And it's almost like, well, why are you taking the hard route, mate? Because this is the easy route and go talk to the people that, have done this before.
You've had, the privilege of not just obviously working with startups, entrepreneurs, but across the whole innovation ecosystem. I don't think there's any organization that does innovation as well as Stone and Chalk. What is your outlook for the future of the innovation economy and just generally the future?
Big question. I think if you look at kind of the component parts of where we try and play, we really are ultimately looking at, well, what are all the bits of the system that Australia needs to make kind of future industry successful, right? And so for a founder, you need customers, you need capital, you need talent. They're the big ones. I think there has never been a more exciting time for people like myself and you in terms of the massive influx of people starting businesses and the absolute collapse to zero of the barrier of entry to start a tech business. And so that is so exciting. That is so different from what it was 2, 5, certainly 10 years ago. And, ultimately the more people that are working in tech, following a path of entrepreneurship, starting to think about how they apply AI to their jobs, et cetera. Like that is net positive, not just for the startup ecosystem, but for Australia. I think there's going to be like any of these waves, there's going to be this massive wave of kind of like excitement and then, not much happening and then consolidation and then fear and then job loss. But any entrepreneur knows like the moments of change are the ones that you kind of gravitate to because that's where the opportunity is. And if I look at the corporate conversations, for example, right now, there's a real renewed sense of urgency and a recognition that we can't just keep doing innovation theatre. We can't just keep slapping our logos onto innovation programs and sponsoring startup events, because actually now our core business is being disrupted, and it's not been disrupted in 5 years. It's been disrupted now. And so for any entrepreneur and for organizations like us who are trying to get like the Australian system moving, that is the perfect moment. It's going to be super messy. I think a lot of organizations are going to find themselves in real trouble from the perspective of how much they've underestimated the capacity of tech to kind of like impact their like core value chains. But ultimately, there's going to be a whole bunch of winners. And I really believe that, the question will not be like, does the Australian startup ecosystem, are we going to have the best run by virtue of number of companies and number of success stories ever? Like, I absolutely think that that's so obvious to me. The question is like, what's the velocity of growth globally? What's Sydney going to do? And then what are the other states going to do? And I think the opportunity is kind of to make sure that we're meaningfully capturing our fair share of opportunity. And I'm super excited. I think change is good. I think, if you start to look at some of the big moves by some of the hyperscalers, Claude's and OpenAI's, et cetera, to set up shop in Australia, you look at some of the, investments in kind of like the tooling, the platforms, the products. You look at some of the areas like, say, the university sector, where arguably not much has changed over the last few years in terms of, Australia really like realizing this opportunity to spin out more stuff. Ultimately, the more pressure that is created in the environment, and I'd say there's never been more pressure in terms of international school fees and geopolitics and a whole bunch of stuff, like that creates these perfect environments where innovation happens. And so, I think it's going to be a wild ride the next couple of years. There's going to be a bunch of people that are kind of left behind or impacted, but net for Australian tech. And I think, like, most importantly, like this shift for the startup ecosystem from being this like kind of like sexy like thing off to the side to being increasingly recognized as more important as an enabler for the whole economy. Like, I don't think we're gonna get there at a tenth of the pace I'd like to get there. But I think we're going to make meaningful inroads in the next couple of years, because you look around and you go, where's the growth going to come from? And for you and I and for Simon, it's so bleedingly obvious. But I think the next couple of years are really going to start to show when you look at, some of the predictions, like, I think the CEO of Anthropic saying, 50% of white collar jobs impacted in the next 1 to 5 years. Like that is the most sizable change that's ever happened to the Australian economy. And, if I look back to, why did we start Stone and Chalk 10 years ago? That opportunity was off the back of the global financial crisis and us seeing a lot of bankers basically out of work. And so that was like 5%, 2% of what we're seeing now. And that created a whole cohort of some of Australia's most valuable tech companies and some of the world's most valuable fintech companies. Just being in the right position to capture that moment for Australia. And so I think now the opportunity is 100x that.
Compared to the way we sort of gently managed descent from manufacturing and other areas of Australia's industrial economy into other areas. It's the pace, I think, is the thing that everyone is grappling with trying to address at this point in time. Chris, you've been incredibly diplomatic, I think, in your career and collaborated strongly with government. So I want to ask, what would your advice be to government if they said, hey, mate, we're not sure, do we get out of the way? Do we need to be doing something? What role does government have to play in the success of Australia's startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the first thing's leadership. And I think doesn't matter if you're government or you're private sector, like consistency of message and signal means investment, certainty, people can get on with it, they know the conditions, the rules, etc. And our world has been subject to, for anyone that follows, like mass amount of change, like every political cycle, every state, you know, a whole host of programs that kind of start and stop and all the rest of it. But ultimately, now more than ever, for the prosperity of like Australian citizens, so to speak, or people in New South Wales, it's so obvious that the work we need to do to prepare our, you know, taxpayers, but also workers for a future that is very different, needs to happen quickly, and that needs to, and we need growth in our economy. And so I think leadership, like strong political leadership around ultimately recognizing not just that startups matter, but that we must quickly start to develop industries and great jobs so that we can take advantage of and not be victim to the change that's happening. I think that's incredibly important. And then the second, I think, is there are 100 different ways that governments around the world think about interventions at any time to support entrepreneurs. There's so many different you know, if you look around the world, there's so many different programs, there's strategies, there's, you know, government does everything, you know, government supports but does nothing, you know, there's everything in between. I think the benefit we have now is that Australia is not, for almost anything we could decide to do, it's not the first time, one, that we've tried this in Australia, but two, that this has happened globally. So we've got not even fast follower, we're in a like a mature regulatory setting environment where actually like the trade-offs and the decisions and the it's like, okay, government wants to launch a venture fund, great, here's how you do it, and if you deviate from that, you're introducing risk and you need to accept it, right? And so I think there's a very like mature way in which we can think about these systems. And my advice for any governments is like really to think about the mix between what you seed and own and control versus what you do to spark, ignite, and support, but or transition out of or step away. And I think, you know, the best examples I see of activity around Australia in this space from governments is where they understand that ultimately you need to create an environment where you have a deep and rich system that can support entrepreneurs, and ultimately that system needs to withstand political change. And so I think, you know, like the early work in Tech Central, for example, is a good example. There's some great moves to start to really make sure that, you know, there's a strong foundation around some of the bigger tech and other players playing an important role, like complementing the work that government does. And ultimately, I think, there will always be this tension between like, as government, solve ourselves versus, you know, solve with others. And there's a chance to be more sophisticated about how they do that.
You're heading into a new chapter,
Yeah.
which is very exciting. I want to know, if you had to start a startup, what would it be?
Ooh.
If I had to start a startup.
You've seen so many
now.
now. You've surely got some ideas.
Yeah. I
I
think
putting
that's,
your hand up as co-founder.
yeah, let's go.
Great, let's do it.
Yeah. Podcasting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like an what would you call it? Like an occupational hazard, so to speak, of being around so many entrepreneurs. Is like every week you're like, that is the best idea I've ever heard of. Let's go. You know,
Here, take all my money.
and I've, you know, part of my who I am, I guess, is, you know, I just get so excited by, you know, the dozens of companies that come to us every week, and you just, it's impossible not to be just so energized by what's coming through. I think, yeah, for me, like a very real kind of next step, and, you know, part of the fun process I get to do over a couple of wines in Italy over the next couple of months is think about what's next. But part of that chapter for me is absolutely thinking about, you know, I'd love to start a business one day. And I think so much of the reflections around, you know, ultimately where the world's going, but then what are the things that are going to be most impactful in supporting Australian companies to succeed in this age of AI. Like, that's what I think about a lot. I think about like, what are the areas that we have relative competitive advantage, and what are the things where there's still too much friction in helping companies. And I've seen, we've seen some amazing examples recently of almost like this picks and shovels approach. Like, AI Build Club's a good example where, they've taken a pretty obvious realization that, hey, we've got to get more people skilled up on the tools, but also like what's the opportunity if we can unlock a whole new generation of people creating their own companies. And I think this is a space and a mission that there'll be a lot of good work required in perpetuity, and that I personally love and feel like I've found my calling. And now I get like a fun opportunity to think deeply about, I think more from a product perspective than a services perspective. What are the things that could really meaningfully help Australian founders to win? And that's what I'm super stoked about. And I think if anyone's got ideas and suggestions, like, let's go, because there's still, as you know, so much work to be done. It's still too hard to raise money. It's still too hard to get customers. It's still too hard to actually like navigate the 4,001 different tools you're supposed to be able to use. And it's still too opaque, like where the opportunities are in Australia for entrepreneurs. They're like out there, but it's like you need some like divining crystal ball to kind of work out, where do I go and what do I do? And so I think there's still a lot of friction in that process. And, Stone and Chalk and others will play an important role over the next couple of years in cracking it. But for me personally, like it's a pretty fun chance to step back and go, hey, like blank sheet of paper, like how can I have impact?
I think it was Majella's first anniversary on Saturday. So
wow.
as
Oh,
CEO
wow.
of
True.
Fishies,
Oh,
so
yeah.
happy anniversary. So what would your advice be to her in terms of longevity as a CEO? How do you maintain it? I have a thing where I think that in terms of the startup sector, I am basically sucking the enthusiasm out of their blood, and that energizes me and keeps me going.
Very vampire-esque.
Yes, there is. There is the Bram Stoker aspect to what I do as a journalist. Do you get a little bit of that from
a little
role
bit
as well?
I mean, that's like the best part of the job, right?
Yeah.
You just have this. I mean, you can't be a pessimist and be a successful startup founder. It just doesn't work. And so you around this like infectious awesomeness all the time. I mean, my advice is hold yourself to account for how much time you're still spending with founders, because that's, I guarantee, where you'll get your energy. And that's what will remind you of like what you do and why you do it. And for me, that's what's definitely not just got me through, but made like the last 10 years so freaking awesome. Because in our sector, you can see from the numbers and just the kind of like rise and fail of all these startup success organizations, it's a really tough business. You exist to support others. The economics are challenging, and you every year you kind of like looking around going, okay, like how do we make sure we're managing this business responsibly? But ultimately, what a privilege to be around some of the most ambitious, awesome people in Australia. And I think enjoy it, and don't lose sight of what a privilege it is.
I love it.
And I'm just going to flip that accountability as a parent.
Yeah.
How do you do that accountability so that you're not going to the kids, darling, daddy's CEOing right now. I'll get back to you. How do you hold yourself accountable to family so that you get that, do your best on that front as well?
Yeah, well, I do not profess to be a parenting expert. I think anyone feel free to phone or text in parenting advice, and I will genuinely take it. Like the thing that I don't know whether I just didn't think about it or I didn't understand, or maybe just hit me heaps harder than I expected was how present kids make you. And it's like, and how obvious it is if you're not present. And I think that's something I've always, I had a bit of a hippie kind of like mentor early in my career. And I used to think this guy was so weird because we'd leave meetings and he'd like ask me like what I thought the room smelt like or something. It was like his way of trying to like be in the moment. But I think that's something that I'm so grateful for with both my daughters is like, you get home and you're in the zone. And, it's reminded me around, attention is currency, and how, you've ultimately got to be really deliberate about where you focus. And for anyone that's a parent running a business, you have the most intense forced prioritization and consciousness around where you spend your time. And I think that is a huge superpower because I no longer have the excuse around, well, I'll just work more. And so, geez, that's confronting and tough, but it's also freaking awesome because you have a much more purposeful and like heaps richer life. And so, yeah, for any founder going, oh, geez, like is now a good time to have kids? Just do it. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's like building a business, building a family.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have the answers, so you might as well just double down on that.
Yeah. A lot of problem solving over the next 20 years.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
If you look back over the last 11 years, what would you, and you had your time again.
Yeah.
What do you stop, starting and continuing?
Oh, stop, starting, continuing.
Let me get the frameworks in here.
What would we stop doing? I think we eventually stopped, but far too late. Like one of the things about a business like Stone and Chalk is you can do lots of things for lots of people. And when you think about, corporates and government, etc., I think the temptation is like go solve lots of stuff. And what we did do, when I took over as CEO a couple of years ago is really just like a refocus around the entrepreneur. So it's like, be clear on who your primary customer is and do that well. So I think that particularly for a personality like mine, who's like every shiny toy I want to chase, that's just like an ongoing process that the team have to deal with every week. But like power of focus, I think absolutely. Start, I think, I think it would have been really powerful for us to more meaningfully tap into and kind of make more visible, I think, what's now an incredible alumni community, but ultimately really early on actually in Stone and Chalk's history was a bunch of founders that were kind of making it. And we almost thought of Stone and Chalk a bit like, a school or uni where like you're really proud of the kid and they do a good job and you give them a high five and off you go. But kind of massively underestimated the potential of, this really unlinear kind of founder journey where you kind of like exit and do something else and then turn up and then invest. And so I think that kind of like messiness is actually real magic. And we're just starting to kind of like get there now in terms of like how do you really unlock that, but it's still not perfect. And then continue, I think continue is totally culture. Like I think the thing that anyone, I mean, Simon, you probably remember winding the clock back 10 years ago, like you walk into Stone and Chalk, it was a bunch of chalkboard paint that a whole bunch of interns and I think my then girlfriend at the time had, painted on the wall, and it was so scrappy. It was crazy. Like we realized we actually couldn't afford ceiling tiles. So we just didn't put ceiling tiles in the build. Like it was so rough and ready. It was ridiculous. But I think it didn't matter because ultimately we were really clear on the culture that we wanted to create. And it was so like intangible. And actually as we got bigger, it's become harder because you've got to like fight and preserve and challenge and kind of like it's this nuanced thing that's you've just got to really protect. But I think for me, that's always been the beautiful thing, like being able to create a space where people feel like they're part of something bigger and that it's like the expectation to support others. It was the first time, like I've been in all of these big, banking organizations where you have some values on a piece of paper and no one even knows what they are and some marketing person's written it and kind of who cares, but it's something you feel. And I think if you walk into most of the innovation hubs and kind of startup incubators around Australia right now, you'll actually feel it. You'll see it. You'll hear it. It's like messy and noisy and loud and awesome. And so I think, that's something I'm really proud of. And I think the net kind of result of that, I hope, I don't think we're there yet, but I hope is, what I experienced before Stone and Chalk World and, my first steps into this tech world where at Fishburners, I would sneak into the back of events and, I was kind of nervous I'd get kicked out because I wasn't meant to be there. But it was really kind of like quite confronting to take the first steps into this like big, scary world that wasn't a corporate job, and I definitely didn't tell anyone I went to this stuff in case it didn't work out. That was kind of how it was.
He's a closet founder.
Totally. Yeah. Well, part of the reason, I would, I'd get the train home to Central and then I'd walk up for Bow Street to Surrey Hills. And I would like weirdly hang out in front of these dark offices late at night because I knew that there were startup founders in there. And some of those startup founders became like the first, Pocketbook was one of the companies, became like one of the first companies at Stone and Chalk. And like they probably had like some mate above a kebab shop that they paid, $100 to a week, and they could just like hang out in their office or something. I had no context as to what it looked like. But I think like, even though I had the emotional affinity, it was still too confronting and definitely not accessible for me to then go, well, how do I find my place? And I hope that, ultimately the impact of organisations like Stone and Chalk and Fishburners and others, and, a lot of the work that's gone in over the last 10 years has started to make that a little less intimidating and a little more accessible, because, ultimately that's, if you can help people find their start in this world, you're off, you'll find your place.
I want to ask you about Adelaide, because you spent a fair bit of time down there with Stone and Chalk as one of the pioneers of the nascent Lot 14.
Yeah.
We've got South Start in a couple of weeks.
Can't wait.
Gilmore Space has just opened up down there. I know Brad from Tankstream has opened up down there.
Yeah.
Adelaide and South Australia in general is firing. What is in the water? What was the impression you got, aside from brilliant women like Moira Weir and Danielle Seymour at South Start? There is something rather magic about that place. Is it the red wine again?
It could be. I mean, I try and explain to everyone outside of Adelaide that we're all related, or went to the same school, or live on the same street. And it's hard for people to understand, but it's so true. It's ridiculous. And so I think, there's something special in having somewhere small enough that you really can have control, influence, and like design a system. And, there was a beautiful moment when I moved down to South Australia where they had an old hospital right in the middle of the city, massive 12-hectare space that was being shut down, and they were going through this process. The first thought was, can we build more residential housing? And, thankfully that one was killed, and the opportunity was, okay, well, like, what about we have a red hot crack at creating businesses that are going to be, tech powered, and, more represent the future that we want in South Australia. And so, that started as a hub, probably supporting 150 or so entrepreneurs down in Adelaide, like super small, and rapidly has become, I think, a really not just world-class, but like a great example of what's possible when you think about what is the system that a state can provide to support entrepreneurs. How do you pick one or two things, like, for example, the space industry, like you said, and do that really well? And then, from a precinct perspective, I think, how do you think about like what makes a city unique and special and gives it heart and soul, and how do you like blend that into, the tech scene? And so I think, one of the things South Australia has done brilliantly is think about, well, what makes South Australia special? And, things like we were talking about, like WOMAD, incredible weekend, world music, the Fringe Festival. There is just like, Adelaide is the festival state. And I think something that we've done really well is think about, well, how does like the creative space and entrepreneurship come together in this weird, beautiful, awkward, messy, crazy way to create something really, really cool? And, I think it's got natural advantages, like it's a relatively cost-effective place to grow a company. There's a great pool of talent. And ultimately for companies like those that you mentioned in the space sector, where you're, launching rockets, building satellites, you've got to do that in a space where you can cost-effectively build a business, but also access talent that's going to be able to do stuff that for many Australians is just seen as like completely unachievable. And so, I think Adelaide's got it in spades. There's been a really strong, I think, consistency of political leadership. There's some great depth of programming to support entrepreneurs. It's awesome to see more and more, startup support organisations, Tankstream and others, setting up shop down there. And I think that's just a recognition of, the growth in the number of entrepreneurs picking places that aren't Sydney and Melbourne around Australia. So, I'm super excited.
My last question is, outside of drinking wine in
Yeah.
Italy and building the product that's going to shape the future of the startup ecosystem, what are you looking forward to most?
What am I looking forward to most? I'm looking forward to, weirdly, this like deep moment of existential crisis that is going to happen. And I see this with so many founders after they leave or exit businesses, where you have to kind of like almost reassess your personal identity. And I can't wait for that. That's going to be messy. I'm sure I'll have moments where I'm like, what am I doing and kind of what's next? But I think it's always in those moments that like great stuff happens. And I'm really excited about, both the next couple of weeks in this process I've got to go through to, really transition a company from being maybe more like a founder-led company into a company that can kind of do, successful leadership, but kind of like generational change. But for me personally, it's like, I get to go through this fun, indulgent, awesome self-discovery process of, putting my head back out there, looking at who are the incredible companies in Australia, thinking about my skill set, learning, like spending some time back on some of the AI tool sets, going to be awesome. And bring it on. Like what a privilege to be able to spend some time, thinking about what's next, and to do that in a way where quite genuinely I don't have a hard hypothesis on what's next. I think, that's something that for someone like me that's kind of thinking about like 10-year chapters is so cool to like have this window to do that, and to do it drinking a couple of bottles of wine in Italy will be nice and fun.
I could ask you about Montepulciano versus Nero d'Avola or Barbera, but I'm going to finish with this. It's International Women's Day on Sunday.
Yep.
You've got a brilliant wife, 2 wonderful daughters. What inspires you about them?
What inspires me about my girls or about women in tech in Australia?
Oh, you can answer both questions.
Yeah, I think what inspires me about my girls, I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, and I can tell you right now they're going to be fierce and stubborn and tough in the best, most awesome, most difficult parenting way ever. And I think like that's all you could want as a parent. Like I can totally see they're like just insatiable for learning, and I think like in a world which is going to be so different and one that's like really hard to imagine in 10, 15, 20 years time, I think ultimately having daughters who are strong and fierce and competitive, I'm just so excited by. I think that mirrors to what we're seeing in the International Women's Day. Like we every year for the last couple of years run this awesome program where we put out, hey, if you're a brilliant female founder, put your hand up and, we'll support you via a scholarship with Stone and Chalk. We had over 200 applicants for that program. We actually ended up, I think we offered 3 times more scholarships than we ever have, because we were looking at the quality of applications and we're like, this is incredible. And so often I think, and particularly for female founders, there's a confidence piece where you're just either not as visible or, the business has to be more baked before you put your hand up and say, like, look at what I've got. But what we saw, through this process was, 1, people willing to share what they're doing much earlier, which I think is an awesome sign of like maturity and vulnerability. 2, like massive influx of people just creating awesome companies that we think are going to be exciting. And then just the quality of companies. I mean, one company, for example, was creating a hardware device so that vision impaired people could translate text on a screen into Braille, so they could follow on more effectively, what's coming through the screen via like a automated Braille device. And you look at that and you go, I didn't know that was a thing. I never remotely thought about it as something, but like as a, potential to fundamentally transform and make tech more accessible and just make people's lives better. Awesome. And, ultimately we're supporting, like a dozen plus of those, and they'll be announced on an International Women's Day. But it's hard not to be excited and positive, and Australia's still got a long way to go in terms of supporting more females into a path of entrepreneurship. But we're making progress, and you can see that in some of the Startup Muster results over the last couple of years, which is good as well.
Chris Kirk, we wish you all the best with the next stage of your career. Thank you also for the incredible work you've done at Stone and Chalk. Great to have you on Startup 360.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Majella. And
I'm tempted to go over and join him, although I am hoping to go over to Italy in May for a hike through the Umbria region and a few Castelluccio lentils. So, maybe I'll have a bottle of Chianti in my backpack and catch up along the way.
Sounds good.
What are your plans for the weekend?
My plans? I haven't even thought that far ahead. Is that bad? No.
No, it's fine. Yeah, just living life.
I have a friend's birthday, and I'm going to the Gidley, which has the 9th best burger in the world.
The 9th best burger.
I've been there before, and it's.
Did you have a view? Was it like more 8 or 10? Or
it melts in your mouth. Like it's like an 11 out of 10. So I'm particularly looking forward to that. What about you?
Fantastic. Of course, last night the Swannies played the opening round. We've recorded this before the game, so I am a little bit nervous, but also very excited, and will have been there when everyone is listening and watching. But this weekend, I reckon there'll be a little bit of chill time because it has been a busy couple of weeks, and so I'm going to stay relaxed.
Just what the doctor ordered.
And of course, F1. I've been watching Drive to Survive on Netflix.
So good.
Lots of Atlassian logos. There's a whole episode about the Atlassian Williams racing team, which is a great one to watch. And of course, you'll see plenty of Australian tech names across many of the logos on many of the F1 cars. If you haven't seen the series, do have a look. It's a fascinating, even if you're not into F1, the storytelling is amazing. You look at a group like Red Bull Racing, where in the middle of last season, this is the 2025 season, the guy who ran it for 20 years was punted. Some of you will find the most interesting thing about him is he's married to a Spice Girl, but Jerry Halliwell. But it's a wild world, and it's just told really, really well. Not too much racing, but enough to make it pretty exciting and scary when you see these cars at ground level, leaping around corners. It's wild. So my son's completely into F1. So Sunday afternoon probably will be on the couch watching that. I had a great time on Saturday night last week watching the Mardi Gras. Probably the best place to watch when you're a middle-aged white heterosexual. But I thought that was fabulous. The Swannies were in it. Canva was in it. Canva had their own float with a big yellow rubber duck. So
great.
It looked like a fabulous night. So that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed the show. Of course, you can watch on Spotify, or listen on Spotify, listen on Apple, and watch on YouTube. I got the 3 places you can get it right this time. Of course, Startup 360 is a Smart Code Media production, produced and edited this week by Mikey. Thank you for that, mate. Greatly appreciated. Thanks, of course, also to Matt, to James, to Ella, and to Deal for their support. Don't forget, you can also subscribe to startupdaily.net. It's absolutely free. Sign up and you'll get the regular newsletters and, of course, all the crazy things that I write about along the way. We'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.